However, I can assure you that we did our diligence with the large volume of calls that we had. We expanded a serious amount of resources on each of these incidents that took place on that day. Our teams will walk you through the entire timeline of each investigation for you to have a clear understanding and clear picture of how things unfolded and what we were collectively looking at the time each incident occurred. As we talk about these incidents, a few things I would like to point out is that our processes take time. It was not until the early evening that we were able to gather enough information that was of substantive value to share with the public for a safety alert. However, in the process of putting together the information for that alert, the final officer-involved shooting occurred, and all of our resources were diverted to take care of that incident. Just prior to that, we had a cyclist that had been shot, and our resources were attempting to find the person of interest, and there was no indication at that time that those incidents were related. The description we were working on throughout the day were different. Each vehicle used was different. So while it might have seemed that it was obvious, there was no indication based on the information and intelligence that we had at the time the incidents were unfolding that they were related. I would like to turn it over to Chief Sneed from AISD, who would like to make a few comments.
Thank you, Chief Henderson. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me here. This year, we have faced many serious and critical incidents in our schools and in our communities. This situation was just as impactful. I would like to say thank you for the overwhelming support that the Austin Independent School District and our community received from various local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies. The quick response that was demonstrated is much appreciated during these unfortunate and tragic incidents, including but not limited to the shooting at Northeast Early College High School on Tuesday, December 5th. As a result of the great teamwork, we were able to place the campus on lockdown immediately to ensure the safety and security of our staff and our students. In addition, through the collaborative teamwork between the Austin ISD, Austin Police Department, and various other law enforcement agencies and resources, it allowed for us to bring this unfortunate sequence of events to an end. I want to thank those heroes, the police officers who make the ultimate sacrifice and place their lives in harm's way each day to protect their communities. My thoughts, prayers, and condolences are with those officers and those families who experienced and suffered pain or losses. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to Chief Henderson.
I'd like to now introduce you to everyone that will be joining me today, giving a brief out of the series of timeline and overview of the case that they are handling. First, I will start with Sergeant Kovac. He'll do an introduction of the case and lay initial findings out. Detective Solis, he will cover the Austin Independent School shooting timeline. Detective DeLuna, he will focus on the double homicide on Shadywood Lane. Detective Spittler, he will cover the shooting of the cyclist and double homicide and the officer that was shot on Austral Loop. And then Sergeant Sexton will conclude and do a wrap-up of all the incidents, starting with Shadywood, Austral Loop, and then what was discovered through Bexar County. Sergeant Kovac.
Good afternoon. My name is Sergeant Peter Kovac with the Austin Police Department's Homicide Unit. My name is spelled Peterkovach. So, start off the briefing. Like I said, we just want to give you all a quick overview of the incident. The incidents that transpired on December 5th, 2023. Some of the things that we found out over the course of the investigation throughout the day that included numerous crime scenes. So to start off, on December 5th, 2023, at approximately 7:10 p.m., Shane Matthew James, a white male born March 7th, 1989, was apprehended by the Austin Police Department following a series of murders and assaults across the Austin area as well as to the Bexar County areas, covering multiple counties. And it lasted, in addition, in excess of over 8 hours. At this time, Mr. James is charged with 4 counts of capital murder for the murders of Emmanuel Potba, age 32, Sabrina Rahman, age 24, Catherine Short, age 56, and Lauren Short, age 30. In addition to these victims of capital murder within the Austin area, there were 2 other victims that were discovered within Bexar County that he was also the suspect in, and that was the murders of Phyllis James, age 55, and Shane James, senior, age 56. In addition to these charges, Mr. James is also charged with 2 counts of first-degree felony aggravated assault on a peace officer, in addition to 1-degree felony aggravated assault for the shooting of a bicyclist in South Austin. Quick overview and background on Mr. Shane James, the suspect in this case. A look into his records shows that he was other than honorably discharged for unacceptable conduct from the U.S. Army in 2015. Prior to that, he had served approximately 3 years and achieved the rank of first lieutenant. In addition to that, the only other involvement that the Austin Police Department had with him up until December 5th was 2018 emergency detention, in which he had come to Austin to the Mosaic Church, Mosaic Church, located at 12675 Research Boulevard on March 7th. They had called in saying that Mr. James was experiencing what they thought to be suicidal ideations. Officers responded up there and took him into emergency custody due to him being a danger to himself and or others. Up until that point, and since then, we have not had any involvement with Mr. James. Continuing along, really quick, this just shows a brief overview of the case in sequential order. Again, like I said before, this series of murders and the investigation spanned numerous counties, starting in Bexar County and continuing up here to Travis County. Numerous investigative agencies were involved with this. Again, like I said, it lasted in excess of over 8 hours during the investigative time and the time during which the crimes were committed, and included 6 major crime scenes and numerous other smaller crime scenes that we had to investigate. Those crime scenes included 7104 Berkman, which is the Northeast Early College High School, at approximately 10:41 a.m. That was handled by our Ag Assault Unit, and that is the case in which Mr. James is charged with 1 count of aggravated assault on a peace officer. Following that, we also investigated the double homicide that occurred at 7315 Shadywood Drive at approximately 11:59 a.m. when that call came in. That case was investigated by the Austin Police Department's homicide unit initially, and that is in which the 2 victims were charged. He is charged with capital murder in the murders of Emmanuel Potba as well as Sabrina Rahman. Following that, the next crime scene was at 5701 Slaughter Lane that was called in at 5:47 p.m. That's going to be the aggravated assault that he is charged with in first-degree felony for the shooting of a bicyclist down there on the hike and bike trail in South Austin. The next crime scene that we investigated was at 5376 Astro Loop. This call came in at approximately 6:49 p.m. This is also investigated by the Austin Police Department Homicide Unit, in which the murders of Catherine and Lauren Short occurred. Again, those are the other 2 capital murder charges that he is facing at this time. In addition, at that scene was also whenever officers responded and he engaged police officers, injuring one of our police officers, and that is also where he is looking at another charge for aggravated assault on a police officer. The investigations culminated after he fled from police and was involved in a collision at SH-45, the intersection of SH-45 and FM 1826, which he was quickly apprehended thereafter at 7:10 p.m. whenever this occurred. During the course of the investigation that has occurred after 7:10 p.m. and later into that night, we were made aware of possible relationship of Mr. James to 6403 Port Royal Drive down in Bexar County. We initiated a check welfare with Bexar County Sheriff's Office to conduct a check welfare down there, and that is when they located the last two victims. He has not been charged with their crimes at this time. The investigation into their murders is still ongoing. This time, I'm going to hand it over to Detective Brandon Solis to talk about our first scene.
Good afternoon. My name is Detective Brandon Solis with the Austin Police Department Aggravated Assault Unit. Name is spelled B-R-A-N-D-O-N-S-O-L-I-S. As Sergeant Kovac stated, I'll be discussing the incident that occurred on the campus of Northeast Early College High School on December 5th, 2023. At approximately 10:43 a.m., Austin 911 received an emergency phone call stating that an AIC officer had been shot and EMS was on the way. Initial information provided to Austin 911 indicated that the injured AISD officer was located on the grounds of Nelson Field. However, the information was corrected to indicate that the officer had actually self-rescued himself and was located at the EMS station located at 7200 Berkman Drive. The AISD officer in question was identified as Sergeant Val Barnes, a 28-year veteran of the Austin Independent School District Police Department. Sergeant Barnes sustained 2 gunshot wounds, 1 to each leg. Upon arriving at the EMS station, he was found to be attempting to put a tourniquet on one of his wounds. Austin EMS treated him and transported him immediately to Del Seton Medical Center, where the wounds were determined to be non-life-threatening. At approximately 10:46 a.m., information continued to come in to Austin 911 that provided at least 3 suspect descriptions and 2 vehicle descriptions. Beyond those descriptions, the only information that could be corroborated was that the suspect fled the scene from the Northeast Early College campus, southbound through the parking lot on the Athletic Drive, and into the area of 290 and Cameron. At approximately 10:56 a.m., the Austin Police Department Aggravated Assault Unit was made aware of the incident. The Austin Police Department Aggravated Assault Unit is charged with investigating crimes against peace officers within the city limits of Austin. The Ag Assault Unit responded to the scene. As the Ag Assault Unit was responding at about 10:57 a.m., responding officers that were headed to the campus to assist located a subject at the area of U.S. Highway 290 and Cameron Road. Based on the information that was had at that point, that subject was detained. However, it was determined quite quickly that the subject was not involved and released immediately. At approximately 11:09 a.m., the Aggravated Assault Unit detectives made the scene and began coordinating with our AISD partners with regards to the investigation. At this time, there were several local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies that had already descended onto the campus and were assisting with the actual lockdown and securing of the school. Based on the on-scene investigation, the following was determined to have occurred with regard to the shooting of Sergeant Barnes. At approximately 10:38 a.m., the suspect was captured on AISD surveillance cameras entering the parking lot. Witness cell phone video that was provided to investigators later on showed that at approximately 10:40, the subject was seen running after firing the shots at Sergeant Barnes. Those shots were, based on the timestamp, was about 10:41 a.m. Sergeant Barnes was traveling eastbound through the parking lot, headed for Athletic Drive. As Sergeant Barnes made a turn to head southbound through the parking lot, he encountered the suspect, at which point the suspect was startled. The suspect immediately pulled a handgun and fired several rounds at the patrol vehicle that Sergeant Barnes was in. Based on the violence of action and the immediacy, Sergeant Barnes was unable to take action, but instead he evacuated himself from the situation and drove to the EMS station. As stated previously, the subject was last seen running southbound through the parking lot towards Athletic Drive and then towards the Cameron and 290 road, US 290 Highway and Cameron Road. The suspect was said to have run to a small gray Nissan, unknown make, which was used to flee the scene. Based on the different suspect vehicle descriptions and suspect descriptions, there wasn't any corroborating information at the time. However, several witnesses were able to be secured by AISD prior to the Ag Assault Unit's arrival. Those witnesses were able to provide a more detailed description, which was described as a white male of muscular build, bald with facial hair, 6 foot to 6'4", between the age of 30 and 40 years of age. The surveillance video provided by AISD was able to narrow down the vehicle description to a gray Nissan Versa. Also on scene, several shell casings were recovered. At that point in the investigation, there was no information or no indication of what the motive was, nor was there any indication of why the suspect was on the campus, on the Northeast Early College High School campus. From this point on, aggravated assault unit detectives continued the investigation into the late hours as the rest of this developed. Once there was enough information developed throughout all these cases, there was enough to charge the suspect in this case with aggravated assault on a peace officer, a first-degree felony. At this point, I'll turn it over to Detective DeLuna to discuss the next sequence of events.
Good afternoon. I'm Detective Randy DeLuna with the Austin Police Department Homicide Unit. My name's spelled RANDYDELUNA, and I'll be providing information related to the incident on Shadywood Drive. At approximately 11:59 a.m., Austin Police received a call of a drive-by shooting with a male and a female victim on Shadywood Drive. Soon, multiple calls began coming in of shots fired on Shadywood Drive. Austin police officers arrived on Shadywood Drive at 12:04 p.m. and located a male victim with multiple gunshot wounds. The male victim was later identified as Emmanuel Pop Ba. Life-saving measures were attempted on Mr. Pop Ba, but were unsuccessful, and he was pronounced deceased on scene at 12:16 p.m. Officers located a second victim, Sabrina Rockman, who was found with a gunshot wound at a nearby residence. Mrs. Rockman was transported to the hospital where she succumbed to her wound and was pronounced deceased at 12:40 p.m. Austin Police homicide detectives were notified and responded to the scene to interview possible witnesses and to canvass the neighborhood for video surveillance footage. As the investigators checked the area, many residents were not at home during that time period, and the video footage that could be obtained was of poor quality. Detectives received various descriptions of the suspect, making it difficult to determine whether a person observed on video was a witness or a suspect. After several hours, detectives were able to make contact with more residents returning home for the evening and were able to find better video footage. What we learned through the initial video review, which was within minutes of arriving on scene, Mrs. Rockman left her residence pushing her infant child in a stroller, walking south on Shadywood Drive. Shortly after, Mr. Popba was observed walking out of the same residence, heading north and out of the view of the camera. Mr. Popba had been at the residence since earlier in the day to help the family move into their new home. A suspect was observed on video at that time walking north on Shadywood Drive on the opposite side of the street in the direction of where Mr. Popba was last seen walking. Mrs. Rockman was then viewed running toward the front door of a neighbor's house with the stroller. A dark SUV appeared in the video, traveling south on Shadywood Drive at a high rate of speed. The dark SUV stopped in front of the house where Mrs. Rockman and her child were last seen. The suspect exited the dark-colored SUV and ran towards the front door of where Ms. Rockman was at. The suspect is seen on video returning back to the dark-colored SUV and leaving the scene at 11:58 a.m. The child was not injured and taken to the neighbor's house and later reunited with the father. Through the course of the investigation, a dark-colored SUV was identified that showed belonging to Mr. Popba. The subject viewed walking on the sidewalk when Mrs. Rockman left her residence appeared to match the same suspect exiting the dark-colored SUV and approaching her. I'll now turn it over to Detective Spittler.
Good afternoon. My name is Detective Richard Spittler, and I will be the lead investigator on this case. The spelling of my name is Richardspitler. On December 5th, 2023, at approximately 5:47 p.m., APD officers responded to a shooting call at 5701 West Slaughter Lane. Upon arrival, officers located a male with a single gunshot wound. The victim advised he was cycling on the Slaughter Creek Trail when someone shot at him. The cyclist described the suspect as a white male wearing a burnt orange t-shirt, long pants, and either a hat or a bandana. At approximately 5:48 p.m., Air 1 assigned to the call and responded to the area to search for the suspect, but no one was located. Air 1 stayed in the area for approximately 25 minutes until they had to refuel. Multiple officers remained in the area to search for the suspect. The cyclist was transported to the hospital to receive medical treatment. The location of the shooting was not initially located by responding officers. Based on the initial description given by the victim, it did not appear as though this incident was related to the AISD officer shooting or the double homicide at 7315 Shadywood Drive. At approximately 6:49 p.m., APD officers responded to a burglary in progress. At 5376 Oshawa Loop. The caller advised he reviewed a motion notification received from his surveillance system and could see a male wearing a jacket kicking in the back door to his residence. The caller also stated his wife and daughter were currently at home. Due to officers already being in the area for the previous shooting, the first officer arrived on scene within 2 minutes of the call being received. The first officer on scene observed the suspect inside of the residence. The suspect was seen by that officer exiting the back of the house, and the officer went around the residence to the fenced-in backyard. As the officer entered into the backyard, the suspect shot at the officer, striking him multiple times. The suspect ran to the detached garage and stole the homeowner's 2015 Acura. Additional officers witnessed the Acura driving at a high rate of speed in the 11400 block of escarpment. Officers attempted to initiate a traffic stop on that vehicle, but the suspect refused to stop and a vehicle pursuit was initiated. The suspect went westbound on South Highway 45 and attempted to turn northbound on FM 1826. The suspect lost control while turning and crossed over FM 1826 into oncoming traffic and crashed into a passing motorist. As officers were exiting their vehicle, the suspect immediately exited the stolen Acura and raised his hands in the air. The suspect was compliant with all commands given by arresting officers, and the suspect was identified as Shane James. The driver of the vehicle the suspect crashed into had minor injuries and was evaluated by EMS on scene. While the pursuit was ongoing, additional officers responded to 5376 Oshawa Loop to search the residence. Upon entering, officers located 2 females with gunshot wounds to their person. The females were identified as Catherine and Lauren Short. Video surveillance later confirmed the same person who forced entry into the residence was the same person officers arrested after the vehicle pursuit. Shane was also positively identified as being the person observed on surveillance footage in the neighborhood on Shadywood Drive. I will now turn it over to Sergeant Sexton.
Hello, my name is Sergeant Nathan Sexton. I'm one of the sergeants with the homicide unit. My spelling for my name is Nathansexton. So just to give some background for that particular day, this past Tuesday, December the 5th, that day alone we had over 50 violent crime calls for service between 1 p.m. and midnight. After 5 p.m., 8 of those calls required 3 or more units to respond, and you can see a listing here. This is just a snippet of some of the calls in that time frame. But they included stabbing with the machete, multiple guns being pointed at various subjects throughout the city, male being shot and transported to the hospital. So as the day is rolling on and we're here at the headquarters, we have all these calls that we're trying to filter through as well as filtered through everything else that we've had coming in with multiple suspect descriptions. So as you can imagine, it was a little chaotic that day in trying to determine if there were any commonalities or a common suspect or description from any of the scenes. Various investigative units were working on this. As we've mentioned, we had our aggravated assault unit, all the units that the chief had mentioned, which can make it a little bit difficult having communication between units and jurisdictions and other agencies. As you can see here, it's not uncommon for multiple shootings to occur in the same day and for them to not be linked. That day, multiple units had spent time going from door to door from residences and from business to business at the AISD scene and also at Shadywood at the first double homicide, attempting to locate any better film footage, surveillance video, still photos that they could possibly find. As Detective DeLuna had mentioned, we were able to initially find a video which kind of basically showed what happened, but it wasn't good enough to make any sort of identification on the suspect. It wasn't until much later in the evening where we were able to get that footage. There had been an attempt to put together surveillance video and still images when we did get it, to put that out to the public. As that was being put together, we were notified of the police chase and it crashing out, and we were actually able to pull this up and live stream it from body cameras from the officers and identify that he was wearing the exact same clothing, fit the exact same description as the footage that we had just received not very long before that crash. At that point, we transitioned this to a press release to identify and address all the events of the day. As there were quite a few of them we had to piece together, and we still continue to canvass across town trying to find video evidence and other evidence in general to include trying to locate those suspect vehicles, to include the Versa and a Toyota Sequoia. The Toyota Sequoia was located at 5800 West William Cannon, and that was at 8 p.m. The Nissan Versa was located at 10:40 p.m. at an academy nearby, so it appeared he had basically dumped the vehicle and walked within a mile or two of that area to commit each double homicide. As soon as he was identified after that crash and we were able to get a positive identification for Shane James, our intel unit led that research trying to immediately find family of James to see if there was anyone we could do a check welfare for. Obviously, with the incidents of the day and how many violent crimes and brutal murders had been committed that day, we wanted to check on them. So we were able to contact the Bexar County Sheriff's Department shortly after James' identification. They were able to get in a call for service at approximately 7:43 p.m. in Bexar County. It was shortly after this that they were able to call us back to let us know they had located 2 subjects inside the residence deceased. We later on discovered the purchase of the firearm that had been used, and it was made through a private party sale back on July the 2nd, 2022. Just for some background, it was not until Friday, December the 8th, that we were actually able to put all this together, every single scene ballistically, matching every scene to include Port Royal, Berkman, Shadywood, Slaughter Lane, and Austria Loop. And that same day, Friday, December the 8th, is the day that the rest of the charges were filed to make all 7 charges. Records available show this is the most murders committed in Austin by any one individual since 1991. We want to thank everyone involved in this investigation. It can often take days or weeks to try to piece together information coming in from various sources when you have multiple agencies, different units investigating entirely different crimes. And I really commend all our investigators and talking to each other and having that communication to put it together in the same day within 8 hours. The diligence of these investigators is what led us to the identification and arrest of Shane James in this case. This time I'd like to turn back over to Chief Henderson.
I do want to thank my staff for putting that timeline together. I do know that was quite a bit of time to make sure that we could clearly outline to the public the exact series of timeline, what we knew at what time. So thank you for that. It's very important. Please know that everything that has been shared with you here today gives a better understanding of how each APD unit and our public safety partners work swiftly and collaboratively to identify the suspect and take him into custody. With the sporadic nature of how these incidents unfolded, the length of time that it takes to canvass a scene, gather information, and have an understanding what occurred, how quickly our teams work together in order to get that information and bring Resolute as soon as we took the suspect in custody is impressive. In the immediate aftermath of the tragedies, we were not in a position to put out information because of the sheer breadth and scope of everything that we had learned in such a short period of time. We did not want to do anything that would bring harm to the investigative process. I also want to highlight the excellent response times to each of these incidents. Even in the midst of our staffing crisis, our officers were committed to providing the highest level of professional work our Austin community deserves. It was backfill officers who were the initial responders to the final call on Austral Loop, who arrived in just over 1 minute of the call being dispatched and likely prevented more harm to our community. I could not be more proud of our officers and our department as a whole. Again, condolences to the families of these victims, and I thank all of our heroes that put their lives on the line every single day to keep our community safe. I will now open it up for a few questions.
Chief. Hi. I know that you've talked before and APD has about why alerts weren't sent out, but there's still many members of the community, and also I know some victim families that I've spoken with that are upset that no alert was put out. And so I wanted to give you a chance to kind of respond to some people saying that it was insufficient, that nothing was put out. And I was also curious, what actions are y'all taking, possibly considering to change how alerts are sent out to the public?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. Please note, as stated, as we went through the timeline, it was unclear as to a description that could be provided to the public that would be of use, if you will, just because we had varying descriptions from the initial incident. Even from the initial incidents, there were approximately three different descriptions that we were provided, and we're not in a position to communicate something to the public that would be of value. Please understand, since this incident has occurred, we have already had meetings with Sally Hernandez, with Travis County Sheriff's Office, also with Chief Sneed, on working with, collaborating on how, if there is something to put out, which is the appropriate entity at what time.
Chief.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Chief, just kind of piggybacking off of that, it looked like in the affidavit you said for the first incident, at some point you realized that students had videos, that they recorded something, and there was also a surveillance camera, and from that you were able to do a still photo. Can you talk to us about, one, when that video was provided, and two, because you mentioned something about quality of the videos, can you describe why that couldn't have been put out? That would have kind of maybe helped with the description.
Correct, and I'll have to pass that to one of the investigators who would best. Detective Solis? Okay, thank you.
So to your question, at that point in the investigation, the video wasn't of enough substance to where we had a license plate to provide to anybody, and the actual depiction of the suspect was from the back. There's no face. That, coupled with the three plus different descriptions we got, made it difficult to put out any substantive information to the chains of command to put out to the public.
Is there any difference in how this is handled because it was at a school? I mean, we've seen so much concern over school shootings in particular. We know the suspect left after shooting at Sergeant Barnes, but is there any difference in how that should have been handled just because of who was there at the school?
No, at that point, based on the resources we had at the time prior to Sergeant Barnes being shot, we can sit here and say, well, he had a body cam, he had in-car video. Unfortunately, at the time that Sergeant Barnes made contact with the suspect's violence of action prevented Sergeant Barnes from reacting, which there was no activation of body-worn camera, there was no activation of in-car camera. the cameras that we had on campus that were provided to us by our ASD partners only gave us that portion to work with. And we were even lucky enough that the students kept their wits about them to even record on their video cell phones to provide us with that little information. Based on everything we had available to us, I think that was the best that we could do at the time, and I don't think we could have.
While you're up here, one more question. So we know the students were there. We know there was another employee there. Were they out in the parking lot, or were they inside the school? We know that school doesn't have a gate.
Are we talking at the time of the shooting, or?
Yes, at the time of the shooting.
Based on our investigation, the students were out in the parking lot when it occurred. However, due to the shock of the incident, the students were able to provide much more information than what we got. That's what's in the investigation.
Detective Solis, according to an affidavit that was released today, a still photo from Shadywood was shown to Sergeant Barnes, who was able to identify the suspect. At what point were those two incidents connected?
That connection wasn't made until late in the evening hours when we had more information available to us. That information was not known at the time that the aggravated assault unit was investigating the shooting of Sergeant Barnes.
So even though there wasn't a clear suspect description at first, couldn't an alert have gone out letting people know that there was a police shooting suspect in the area?
There could have been, but unfortunately, without any substantive or corroborated information, that would have only done a disservice to not only our investigation, but I think to the city as a whole. When you provide information that isn't corroborated, it's gonna backlog us. We're gonna spend more time trying to fish out what isn't legitimate, as opposed to putting out information that is correct and corroborative that can actually help the investigation and not deter us.
At some point, between the Shadywood Drive shooting and the biker shooting, there's a big chunk of time missing. Do you guys know what he was doing in between that time?
That isn't my part of the investigation. I can turn it over to the Sexton.
Unfortunately, we had absolutely no idea what he was doing. We were able to, when he was found, he had no phone on him. So there's approximately 6 hours of time that are unaccounted for.
How are officers communicating with each other in that time?
Just a lot of phone calls going back and forth. People at various scenes, going, like I mentioned earlier, just going door to door. A lot of folks back here at the headquarters kind of coordinating. And like I said, there's just so many different units and agencies, but lots of phone calls being made back and forth.
Did I understand correctly that the chief said you were preparing a press release in that time, and then the shooting on West Slaughter Lane diverted those resources? You were preparing to make a statement?
That's correct, yes.
So would that be a staffing issue if there had been more people at Austin Police? Would you have been
It
able
was,
to
no, unfortunately, that was just the timeliness of everything. By the time we were actually able to put together Sergeant Barnes' identification and get usable photo and videos to be able to put something out, it should also be noted that during the investigation, there were multiple theories that this was potentially targeted, that the first victim was targeted, and that these were not random attacks, which would have led the investigation in a different way. If this person had specifically targeted that family, for example, that would have potentially changed the approach. But we didn't know that they were random until much later.
Has he said a motive?
No, he chose not to speak.
What can you say about the purchase, the gun? Was it purchased by the suspect?
Correct. Okay. Yes, and in that case, when it's a private individual sale, there's just less checks essentially, and one individual selling it to the other.
Do you know anything else about the 2018 incident with APD?
Just what Sergeant Kovac had mentioned, that he had traveled up here from the San Antonio area and gone to a church where he ended up getting committed.
When you talk about, to what you were saying earlier, when you talk about ways that you guys are evaluating your own process, how you decide when an alert needs to come out, we know there are laws that are passed that kind of determine the guardrails on when you can request this from DPS. Are there, based on this situation, any changes that you would suggest to make this more effective, more helpful to you all?
Based on the requirements of that law, the thresholds were not met in order to institute that type of alert. At the time of the initial incident, there was no indication that there was an ongoing threat to the public. And as stated, it wasn't until hours later that we were able to tie that same suspect to that incident.
Do you know what time you guys tied it together? Like roughly what time it was?
That was in the evening time,
Evening.
on the same day.
Chief, you mentioned being satisfied with police response times. Can you explain to us what the department was experiencing behind the scenes given the staffing constraints? Did APD staffing challenges affect response to any of these incidents?
In these incidents, it does not appear so. We are still in the midst of a staffing crisis, but like I said, the professional nature of our police officers that work here, they power through, even though we are at critical staffing levels. So again, I do want to commend my officers, our backfill officers, and our detectives, and everybody that worked so hard. Their dedication and vigilance is impressive.
During the press conference that day, Bexar County was pretty critical of you guys, just kind of saying that you guys weren't being transparent. How do you feel about that? Do you have a response to that? And how is the relationship working between you two now?
Yes, ma'am. Please note, at the time of the incidents that occurred in Austin, like I said, we were unaware of who the suspect was or that he even had connections to Bexar County. It was not until after the suspect was taken into custody, identified who he was, and it was with the foresight of our detectives who said we should probably do a welfare check. And it was at that time that it was discovered that there were 2 deceased persons in Bexar County associated with the suspect taking into custody.
We'll take 2 more questions.
When it comes to Sergeant Barnes, and I don't know if Chief Steve is the person to ask this, but when it comes to Sergeant Barnes, we know he was shot in both legs and then self-evacuated. What was the communication between him? We know he's just kind of he's a roving officer supervising. What was the communication between him and the other officers at the school who are now on lockdown and trying to figure out what was going on?
I need to make sure I understand your question. Would you repeat your question?
Yeah, when he took on fire and was shot in both legs and then had to self-evacuate to make sure he got medical assistance, what was his communication to the officers stationed at the school at that time?
The communication that he had given came out that officer down, officer needs assistance, officer shot. That was the last communication that I recall hearing Sergeant Barnes give. There were our officers that responded to the EMS station where he self-evacuated and started administering first aid, placing tourniquets on. They had to place a second tourniquet on because it was excessive bleeding at the time. So I don't know if there was a lot of information that was being exchanged at that point in time. They were more concerned about saving his life.
Is there anything you can talk to us? Obviously, you guys are dealing with new safety requirements from the state. Is there anything you can talk to us about how this situation, as you all have reflected, are y'all making any changes, or is there anything that you fine-tuned after dealing with this situation?
Well, as you know, and you pointed out, obviously we don't have prison gates up around our schools, and so it's an open campus concept. So obviously there are people, this individual just walk onto campus. We ask our officers to be vigilant on the perimeters of their campus. We use video cameras when possible to try and monitor the activities that are going on in and around the campus. So nothing specific at this particular point.
Chief, this is for you. Do you guys
Final question.
I was going to say, do you guys plan to release any video from any of this?
It's an ongoing investigation, so we're not sure. We can't speak to that yet.
Oh, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.